Welcome everyone to another search seminar. Anders, you have 50 minutes. Take it away.
Thanks so much, and thank you a lot for having me. I'm excited to present this paper, Markups on Drop-Downs, Prominence in Pharmaceutical Markets, and it's a joint work with Frederik Plum Hauschultz. So to set the stage for the paper, I want you to think about a setting where a consumer has to make a choice, and there are a bunch of different options, and they're presented in some way to the consumer. And when I say prominence, what I think about is that one of those options is more likely to grab the attention of the consumer. So for instance, on this website for health insurances from Ireland, I believe, this first option here, public plus care, is presented first. So a consumer might click on that. And what this paper is going to be about is, depending on how we choose to assign this prominence, then there's been a lot of work that's shown that that affects demand, and how does it affect demand, and when can we help improve consumer choices. And this paper is going to be about how does that then affect prices? How does that affect competition? So prominence more broadly is an important source of market power. And by prominence, I mean that a product is less costly to search. It's a valuable thing to consumers, as evidenced by the magnitudes of money that's being spent on ads and marketing. But how to exploit prominence, that is a difficult question, as people in this audience have contributed to. There's a question of whether you want to set higher prices or lower prices given that you have prominence, and that depends on where do you have heterogeneity. And so empirically, it's difficult to say ex ante how it's going to affect competition. And so in markets where we have complicated products as insurances, as I showed before, or as in pharmaceutical markets, which is what this paper is going to be about, we have a setting where the policymaker picks a default and thereby awards prominence to one of the products. And so while we know that it affects demand, this paper is going to be about how it affects prices. And the novel thing that we exploit here is a source of exogenous variation in prominence, which comes from the way physicians write prescriptions in Denmark. They use an IT system which displays products in an alphabetical order by the firm's legal name. So that means that if we have a market where there's a product by the pharmaceutical company 1A Pharma, which is a real company, and GlaxoSmithKline, 1A Pharma will be displayed first. So the first ranked product is going to be more prominent to physicians, and so they're going to write more prescriptions to that product. And that is then going to translate into more demand. And this is the, just to show you how the IT system works. This is a screenshot taken by my mother when she was still an active practitioner. And what you can see is that she's trying to find a product called omeprazole. And there are a bunch of different versions of that product available. And the names that are on the packages have the company name in quotes inside them. So that's how this ordering arises. And so to just preview briefly, this is just showing you basically raw data by alphabetical rank. What is the average share of prescriptions that go to a particular product? What you can see is that there's a strong downward trend here. So if you're at the back of the list, not a lot of doctors click all the way down. And how does that then affect prices? And again, these are just raw averages, so we'll be controlling for things later. But on average, if you're in a two-firm market, then we have this blue line up here. The first firm has a log price of 4.85 or something, and the second firm on average has a price just below 4.8. So there's kind of a downward trend here, which appears to sort of gradually flatten when there are more firms present in the market. So in the markets where we have 8 firms, it's virtually flat. Maybe there's a slight tendency here, and it's going to turn out that that's mostly just noise. We don't have that many 8-firm markets. So that's kind of a preview of the first thing that we do, which is to demonstrate that there is a response from prices to prominence. So given this, we then want to explore counterfactual ways that we could design the choice architecture that people meet. And one particularly good idea we've had, we think, is to rank products by price rather than the firm's name for physicians. And so to do that, we need to understand what we need to be able to disentangle what's search frictions and what's preferences and what's the price and all that. And so we develop and estimate a structural model. It's basically going to be the Moraga-Gonzalez model. It's going to be one where physicians search and consumers search, and to physicians, the alphabetical rank determines which products are prominent for them and easy to find, and to the consumer, it's the ones that that are on the prescription and what the pharmacist recommends. We're going to find that physicians behave in a manner that's consistent with rational search. We find that they search more for females and more for poor consumers, but they respond less to price variation than consumers do. We find that removing search frictions doesn't do all that much to improve market outcomes, but ordering products by price is a lot more effective. And the intuitive explanation for this is that the prescriptions behave kind of like loyal customers. So right now, they are all being awarded to firms that are early in the alphabet. And that's kind of giving, it's softening price competition by giving differentiation. So if we just remove search frictions, then physicians are choosing based on random things in match values, and that's just giving some of the loyals to everyone. So that's still softening competition. But if we have all the physicians, or most of them, picking the cheapest product, then we're directing the loyal segment of customers to the cheapest firm, and that's gonna improve price competition. So this is kind of, that's the short version of the paper, demonstrating that there is a response from variation in prominence to prices and market shares, and this structural model. So how do we fit into the literature?
Sorry, can I have a question? Clarification question. So in this case, the physicians choose the product, or the consumers have a voice, or what's the clear setting? So who has the negotiation power?
Yeah, I'll get to I'll get very detailed about how exactly it's going to work. But basically, the short version of this is that disease, the consumer contracts a disease somehow, goes to the physician, who then writes a prescription. Then the consumer goes to the pharmacist. The pharmacist looks at this prescription and says, "Oh, there's this thing on here, but how about this other product which is cheaper?" And then some consumers are just going to say, "Okay, whatever you say." Some are going to say, "No, I'm sure my physician must have meant something by that prescription." And yet other consumers are going to say, "Actually, explain to me, how does this all work? Are there other products I could choose?"
Great, this is super interesting. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, so how do we fit in? So I think we're contributing to kind of taking some of the predictions from the theoretical world and confronting with data, and particularly this distinction between whether prices are increasing or decreasing in prominence or rank, how we think about it. And we're finding a decreasing relationship, and that it depends on market structure. Empirically, we're following up on this recent literature that's exploiting these simpler ways of estimating search models, and we are taking it to the pharmaceutical market. And I think we're contributing also to, there's been a lot of work that's showing that in certain markets where you have information frictions, such as markets for mortgages or retirement savings products, or these settings where consumers might not actually understand really what they're choosing, or there's some subtlety. So we have a default option presented, or we have some things in the choice architecture that's meant to guide them. There's been a lot of work that's kind of disentangling how does it really help, and do they really make mistakes, and so on. And I think that we're trying to take some steps in the direction of saying, okay, given that it does affect demand, how does it affect supply? In terms of just demonstrating that there's an effect of prominence on demand, there's been work that's used online randomized experiments, and so in that sense, that's kind of decentralized because it's at the individual click level, whereas here we're thinking of it. I mean, the ideal version of our instrument would be a randomization at the full price period level, so that all consumers are faced with the same prominence, or all physicians at the same date. Because if everyone faces different levels of prominence, then you might not have a price response at all. And we're also related to, there's been some work looking at price transparency, such as websites that just display prices to lower search costs. And they're actually finding both, so one finds that it lowers prices for insurance, and there's the other paper by Luca, which shows for gasoline markets that it actually raises prices, which is kind of further backing up this ambiguity. And and then I should highlight that this is a this is going to be a centralized market. So there's been a lot of empirical work that's been looking at decentralized markets. So, for instance, markets with negotiated prices, and what are the roles of search cost there. So for those markets, you're going to have price dispersion within a firm at the same point in time, depending on the consumer that comes in the door. And that's going to be different here. We're going to have a price dispersion over time, but at one particular point in time, everyone pays the same price for a particular package. It's just not necessarily everyone that buys that package. And then there's, of course, been a lot of work on pharmaceutical demand. And there's an interesting literature on alphabetical ordering and the economics of names, including ballots and voting. And there's been some work on yellow pages and firms choosing their names and so on, and on the last names of economists, and what it means for career choices, which is interesting for the second author of this paper also. And I think the important part here is that we're thinking of it as they get their name, the firms, and they don't change it. So for instance, the firm that's first in the rank, 1A Pharma, has been in existence for 25 years. So it's been in existence for much longer than our sample period, but no one's overtaken them in the alphabetical rank. Okay, a roadmap for the remainder of the talk. I'm going to go through the institutional details and describe the data, and then I'll show you the regression results on the effect of prominence, and then go to the structural model, and finally show counterfactuals. All right, prescription drugs in Denmark is the empirical setting, and the most important thing to know about Denmark is that there's universal insurance. There's some co-payment, which amounts to about 30% in the median market, but that co-payment doesn't depend on the product you choose. So basically, the government covers part of the cheapest price there is, and then you're paying everything else out of your pocket. A market, whenever I say market in this presentation, it's going to mean a collection of packages that has the same active substance and the same strength, form, and size. So this could be statins in the 20 pill package that's strength of 20 milligrams. And then there are going to be the GlaxoSmithKline version, the 1A Pharma version, and Zocor, the original manufacturer. The price mechanism that's in place consists of simultaneous bidding every 14 days. So on Mondays, all firms submit the prices for the entire product range. So that could be something like 500 products to the government. And then on the later in the afternoon, that gets published on a website. And those are going to be in effect for the next 14 days. As I briefly mentioned earlier, the purchase timeline is that the consumer visits the physician writes a prescription, which has to be for a specific package. So the physician cannot simply say, I don't care which one, I have no reason to choose one over another. She has to choose one particular package. And that's it's actually going to be one of our counterfactuals to say, what if she didn't do that? What if it were just directed at the cheapest one? The pharmacist is then mandated by law to recommend substitution to the cheapest prescription, from the prescription to the cheapest product. So when you go into a pharmacy, that pharmacist is going to see, I see that you have a prescription for the original manufacturer, but there's actually one that's a lot cheaper. It's going to save you such and such. And then some consumers are going to follow that recommendations, not necessarily everyone. Some may say, no, I got this one last, I still want that product. And a lot of people are just going to follow that recommendation. So this is where information provision occurs in the market. And that's the interesting part of the choice architecture to change. And then the consumer makes the final choice and incurs costs. And there's no direct-to-consumer advertisement. And there's also very tight limits on advertisements to physicians in this. And interestingly, there was a recent debate on Twitter among Danish physicians where they got into a heated debate about this annoying IT system they have to click through. So of course we thought that was pretty interesting, because that's exactly our recommendation, is to kind of get rid of it and have an opt-out. Okay, and the law says that a package has to have a name if it's a generic that's on the form molecule name, which could be, so that's the generic name for the molecule, and then the firm's legal name in parentheses, in quotes. And that's what generates this ordering. So the only exception to this is the original manufacturer, which is allowed to use the branded name. And this means that in some markets, the branded product is in front of all packages, and in other markets, it's at the end of all of the list. So that means that even the firm which has the first ranked name will have products in some markets that can never get to rank 1, and in other markets they can, depending on whether or not they're in front.
Quick question.
Yeah.
You segment on strength, form, and size, right?
Yeah.
Is that because that's what they have to do? And should we be worried about, for example, things that are pills that are just different form, maybe fitting the consumer differently?
Yeah, so that's because the physician chooses the kind of the between different ATC substances and strengths, and the pharmacist isn't allowed to choose another strength. So he's allowed to take 100 pill package and split it into 250 pills if that's cheaper, but not the other way. You can't leave with more opioids than were on your prescription, so to speak. And it's also the IT system that the pharmacist uses, which gives this recommendation on their screen, uses these so-called substitution groups that are defined by the government. There's been an interesting case of litigation where one firm tried to push another firm out of a substitution group because they allow a little bit of a 10% variation up and down. So by entering at the lower end of the 10% interval, they could push a firm outside of this artificial market. But so yeah, the market limitation is set by basically by the Ministry of Health.
Thank you.
Okay, the data sources that we use covers the universe of prescription drug transactions in Denmark from 2005 to 16. And we have information on the prescribed and the purchased package. And that's crucial because this means that we observe on the same day when the prices were the same, 2 different consumers where we have variation in their information sets, basically. And we also know who the physician is and the patient is, although we don't really use that currently. And then we have these bi-weekly prices. And what's neat about that data set is that we have something like 8,000 products and something like 82 time periods on average. So it's a large N, large T kind of panel data set. And we have the data on for the purchases. They're linked to age, income, and gender for the purchasing consumers. We restrict our sample to markets with 2 to 8 firms. There are actually a lot of monopoly markets, but they're typically very, very low quantity. So we just get rid of those because the pricing there is a little bit strange. And then we restrict attention to markets that have been off patent for at least a year, and where we have all the details for the packages.
Anders, can I clarify a question, please? So, do they have the regulated prices for the drugs?
In what sense do you mean? In
the sense that the price of the drug cannot be higher than some threshold which is regulated by the government.
Yeah, it cannot go higher than I think it's 80% of the exclusivity price, and you also cannot charge a higher price than the original manufacturer. But other than that, there are no limitations. Typically what happens is that after exclusivity ends, the original manufacturer stays around, but has a very high price and sells very little. And so all of the generics are kind of moving around at prices that are typically 10% or something of, and then every once in a while they go up. I have another paper on the dynamics of prices that show a lot of details on that. But yeah, basically they're very free to set prices.
Okay, thanks.
All right. So for the regression, the specification that we use, we have a range of outcomes. First, there's just log prices. That's kind of the one we're most interested in. We have prescription shares, revenue shares, and market shares as well. And if you remember the graph I showed you, it kind of died out with competition. So we allow for rank to have a different effect depending on the number of products. But basically, these regressions are going to have a unit of observation being a product in a period. And we're primarily interested in the coefficient on rank. And we're going to control for a bunch of things. And then crucially, we're going to use fixed effects. And so the first thing we introduce is a firm fixed effects that's common for all products belonging to, say, GlaxoSmithKline. And that's going to get rid of the variation that's stemming from the names themselves. So that means that after condition on that, the alphabetical rank only varies depending on who you're competing against. Whoops. And then we include market fixed effects to get rid of systematic cost differences for different markets, depending on the molecules that are used. And then we go all the way to product level fixed effects. And so at the product level, then it's a firm in a specific market. So there's only variation in the rank over time if competitors are going in or out of the market. And then to use kind of an opposite source of variation, we can use fixed effects at the market by date level. So there's a very large number of fixed effects. And in that case, we're only using variation across different firms. So the product fixed effects, we're only using variation within a firm over time, and market by date, we're only using on a particular day across firms. And they're going to give very similar results. So that's what makes us pretty confident. But other than that, that's as fine as we can do in terms of fixed effects, and we don't have a randomized experiment. So above that, Yeah, that's as far as we can go. But here's the results with the prescription share as the outcome, and here the results are virtually similar as soon as we can condition on a company fixed effect. Nothing much happens further. Once we go to prices, there's a little bit more. There we have to condition on a market fixed effect and a company fixed effect, and then we have relatively similar results. So 4% to 6% effect per rank position. But we also have this interaction with the number of firms. So to simplify things, this table makes it a little bit easier to compare. If we compare duopoly markets, then every position in rank you move further down, so there are just 2 positions, is a difference of 4.7%, or it's 0.047 log points for price, 4.9 percentage points prescription share, about half of that for market share, and revenue share about the same. And then if we look to the most competitive markets, the effect is almost flat. So in other words, it's an advantage to get prominence. You exploit it by setting higher prices, but once markets get competitive, the effect sort of vanishes.
Sorry, may I ask?
Yeah, go ahead.
So you didn't spend much time talking about entry. So I imagine there are similar markets. I would imagine Sweden, right, where they don't use this thing. Do you see specific patterns of entry given the name of the firms? Did you look at all at this?
You mean in
Let
terms?
me put it this way: is 1A pharma entering in segments in Denmark that is not entering in Sweden because it can capture market share?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we have actually used data from Sweden previously, but it turns out that the data was of lower quality than we had hoped. So we weren't, the market definitions don't match tightly. So we gave up on that avenue, but that's actually a really good idea. Basically, my short answer is I haven't compared to Sweden, but I also don't know if Sweden has these similar IT systems that rank by name.
Right. So more into so here, but most of the variation comes from entry of competitors, right, across time. And,
definitely, yeah.
Right. So I mean, of course, you could use entry in another market as an instrument, right, of a firm that will be ranked here, but you seem to, be happy with the fixed effect estimate here. I don't know.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. You're concerned that
because entry is endogenous, and given that there are big price effects and there are big market share effects, right? Firms will take this into account more even in the long term than in the short term for the price.
So I mean, my short answer is that if you don't like the feeling of the entry, then the market by date fixed effects, I'm not using anything on entry. I'm just comparing across firms. So there's no reliance on entry there. It's and there's also company fixed effects there. But yeah, so I don't have other, but I like your idea of trying to kind of explore this more. But yeah, I mean, there could be versions of entry. I don't know what kind of model you'd need to have for this to give this same results still. But yeah. That I don't know. Obviously, I'm not proving that it's causal in that sense. But yeah, but I take your point.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah, go ahead.
On the last slide, the slide just one before this, this one, where you're looking at the different values when you have more and more firms. Is it because you're using the same like linear coefficient right? So those. The 7th, the 8th, and the 9th rank have very small differences, and so they're messing with your coefficients? Or is it really that the difference between the 1st and the 2nd rank is changing? right? If I'm understanding what you're doing here, I'm just worried that you're not picking up on actually kind of a decreasing in the importance of prominence, but more
Yeah.
your
I mean, it's not a non-parametric specification, if that's what you mean.
Have you
We've
looked at that though? Because I'm just curious as to whether you get kind of overload effect here. Or...
Yeah, so we have, and the short answer is that there's something about the last position. So, and the way I think about it is when I see a list, I tend to look at the first. Actually, I've seen, if you look at these, they have these image things for Google searches where they can see where people are looking on the screens, and people tend to look at the top, but they also look at the bottom. And we actually also see this effect. There's a little bit going on there. So we definitely see something on the bottom. It seems to be somewhat monotonic early on, and then the mid-range it just gets really noisy. But we're clustering standard errors at the product level here, and it just kills significance. So full transparency on that. When we do the full interaction of all ranks and all markets and estimate those 64 coefficients, or how many it is, not many of them are significant.
It was more of a curiosity question.
Yeah. No, but it's a good point. I mean, yeah. So linearity is definitely a functional form thing here. But I feel pretty confident that saying that at 8 firms we're not really. It could be that something's going on there and it's just noise, but certainly I can't claim that there's a strong effect there. All right. Great. So to the model. The most important thing that's going to come into the model is that we're going to now start to look at demand. And this is showing you just a non-parametric plot of within bins of the running variable, what's the average market share. And the running variable is the price divided by the minimum price in the market. And so there are 2 important features that show up from this. And the first is a discontinuity at the bottom. So if you're just epsilon higher than the minimum price, you lose about 30 percentage points market share. And this is the effect of, we interpret that as the effect of the recommendation by the pharmacist, because he has to recommend the system shows him the A-ranked product. And then the other thing that's important is that there's still a substantial and non-negligible market share, even when you're at price levels that are more than 100% above the minimum price. So there are some consumers that still buy products, even though there are much cheaper ones available. And if the pharmacist is doing her job, they've been informed of this. Of course, some pharmacists may not be doing that, but anecdotally from speaking to pharmacists, this could be, there are some elderly patients that are really confused about the changing names on the packages and so on. Okay, so the key ingredients that go into the model is that the physicians are going to search through the drop down in the IT system. Then the pharmacist is going to recommend generic substitution, and the consumer is then going to search, facing different search costs for the cheapest and for the prescribed. So there are 2 agents that are searching, the physician and the consumer. And finally, we're going to compute a static mixed strategy price equilibrium. And the reason why it's a mixed strategy equilibrium is that the recommendation that the pharmacist makes to the cheapest, that's what creates a discontinuity in demand, and that generates an undercutting incentive, which kills off pure strategy equilibria. And I mean, there's quite a bit of variation within product and prices over time. I think the within standard deviation is almost half of the between. Okay, so the alphabetical rank is going to affect physician choice, but not consumer utility, unless it goes through the prescription. And the prescription is going to affect market shares. And just another simple descriptive to highlight this, the pharmacist system divides products into A, which is the cheapest, B, which is near cheapest, and C, which is expensive region. if you're in the expensive region and you were prescribed, there's a 30% chance that you will be purchased. But if you're in the expensive region and you were not prescribed, there's a 6% chance. So, this at least indicates that there's a strong effect of prescriptions, and it appears to matter a lot up in this C region. Okay, so physician choice is going to be sequential research with free recall, and search costs are going to have a mean shifter which depends on rank. And the distribution of search costs is going to come from the Moraga-Gonzalez specification. And final utility is going to be specified as an observable part, which depends on prices and on the consumer, and then the error terms which needs to be searched. And we're going to specify the physician utility as the expected patient expenditures, internalizing her own effect on the prescription choice. And alternatively, we've also had, oops, that's the same. We all also work with a specification that just uses the prices directly, and they result in relatively similar choice probabilities. Yeah, and so this is going to take just the logit form, which is very convenient. Okay, and then the second agent that searches is the consumer in conjunction with the pharmacist, and her search cost is going to be specified as there's a dummy for generic, a dummy for the A region, dummy for the B region. Basically, we saturate it with dummies and interactions between those dummies and the prescription dummy. And so this particular interaction here between being the cheapest and being the cheapest, that's what's going to, this is where discontinuity in demand is going to come from. That when you become cheapest, the search costs drop discontinuously because you get recommended by the pharmacist. And so the final consumption utility is logarithmic in price. And so we arrive at a logit specification. And the final demand that a firm gets is integrates out the prescriptions times the choice probabilities. Yeah, and as I said, the discontinuity is due to becoming recommended, which reduces the search cost for the consumer, and prominence affects the probability that you're prescribed by the physician. So here are the so there aren't that many parameters for the consumer model, and the main thing to take away here is that a 1 unit increase, so that's almost 100% increase in price, that's negative 1.32, and the effect of being in the A region is larger than that. So so this recommendation by the pharmacist is really strong. All right, and then the physician model, we've estimated a couple of different versions. And so the most important thing to take away is that they do respond to the expenditures of the patient. And it appears that just based on this level of significance that expected expenses are a better variable to include, but I mean, they do react relatively similarly. And other than that, the most interesting thing is the fact that search costs appear to be lower for females and higher for the rich. So one way of interpreting that is that physicians might have preferences across their different patients and conserve their effort and choose to spend more time searching for females and for the poor. But no effect for the elderly, which I think I might have expected, given they may have a harder time understanding the system, maybe. But that's what we're finding. And here you have one of the versions here, we have a fully flexible specification for rank, how it affects search costs. And there you can see what I mentioned before, that the very last one is actually smaller. So it's almost monotonic up to that point, but then at the very last one, it falls a little bit. And here's the model fit for the for prescription shares. So with data on this side and model on this side, and the effects at the end is, as I mentioned earlier, that the original manufacturer can be either before or after, and that shifts up, and the model is fitting that. All right.
Sorry to interrupt. You have 10 minutes.
Great. All right. And so here's the implied search cost distribution. All right, but let's talk about counterfactuals. So as I said, there's no pure strategy equilibrium. So we solve for a mixed strategy equilibrium on a grid. And it's a little bit complicated because the payoffs are asymmetric due to the alphabetical rank. So we're inherently interested in the asymmetric equilibria. So we use a solver called Gambit to solve this game. And it uses a homotopy method. All right, so here are the counterfactual results. So first, in the baseline, we are encouragingly finding decreasing prices in rank for this numerical solution to the game. It's not as smooth and it doesn't look quite like it does in the real world, but it is decreasing. And expenditures fall in larger markets. Okay, so the first thing we do is to say, what if there's no search costs to the physician, not to the patient, but to the physician. So we let the patient, we let the physician freely choose where to go. So right now it's more expensive to search the products at the end of the ranked list, and that lowers prices a little bit and lowers expenditures a little bit in two firm markets, but doesn't do a whole lot in the larger markets. Although we can see that it makes the equilibrium symmetric, because then firms are symmetric. However, if we order the list to the physician by rank instead, but preserve the search costs, then they fall by a fair bit more. And as I mentioned at the beginning of the talk, the interpretation here is that when you're giving the prescriptions, that's kind of anchoring the consumer. It's making the consumer more likely to choose your product. So it's giving you a loyal. So prescriptions act like loyals in this market. And so what the free search is doing is it's just distributing. In the baseline, you give most loyals to the alphabetically first ranked firms. So in the free search alternative, you're giving them equally across all firms, but that's still softening competition. But in the price ranking, you're giving the loyals to the cheapest firm. And then you're kind of exploiting the loyals to enhance the price competition. And to provide a reference for how to think about the magnitudes here, we have a version where we force the physician to always prescribe the cheapest, and that's removing all physician agency. And that so that gives us a reference for how far down prices would come if there were no physician prescription at all, so to speak. And we're getting almost halfway there. So that's an unrealistic counterfactual to implement fully in the real world, because the physician may actually have sound medical reasons for prescriptions in some settings. You can actually be allergic to one drug and not to the other. So there are real things in the match values that we don't want to prohibit them from using, but there has actually been a randomized controlled trial implemented in, I think it was in Pennsylvania, where they changed the IT system so that the physician by default would prescribe the cheapest with an opt-out. And something like that could be implemented, but at the minimum, it should be possible to just rank products by price. So that was the counterfactuals. So to sum up, we've studied what role prominence plays in this particular centralized market, and we've used alphabetic ordering as a source of variation. We found that firms exploit their market power from alphabetical rank by raising prices, and we've estimated a structural model and work with these counterfactual alternative choice architectures. Yeah, so I think I'm 3 minutes early. I've never tried that before. But thank you so much for your attention.
This is a rarity. It's very pleasant. Not something I've ever accomplished. Very pleasant. I now open it up to questions.
I have a question about stockouts in pharmacies. So what happens in the pharmacy if you don't have that product? They have to go for the second cheapest or third cheapest. And if so, I mean, I would imagine that the stocking decisions of pharmacies are endogenous here. Like they expect the most popular product maybe more. So
that's a great question. So the answer to this is very complicated. But the shortest. So this is a potential limitation, and we've completely ignored it for now. But what happens is if so basically the firms have very little to say on the most important part of the stocking decision, which is how much of the cheapest to buy. So they have to get a lot of the cheapest, and the logistics operation is out of their control. So there are two firms that take care of all the logistics, and they have to give all of these cheapest products around. How much they stock of the more expensive products is a little bit more. They have some more leeway there. But when they cannot deliver these two logistics operators, if they cannot get enough of the cheapest, then a stock out is reported. And when that happens, all pharmacies in Denmark have to basically, at least if you take the law seriously, send all of their remaining stock of that good back. And then the second cheapest becomes the new A product for the remainder of the period. So basically the pharmacies can't do much in strategizing about this, but the firms might. And the one thing that they could do is they could be strategic about reporting a stock out, even if they actually had more wares. I'm not sure how important it would be here. Yeah, that's difficult to think about. But I mean, in general, I think the question of stockouts is pretty important. There are a lot of them, and it's not clear to me that. Yeah, I just don't think we understand a lot about how firms use that as a strategic variable.
The other question about the mixed equilibrium, you didn't provide any reduced form evidence of mixing. So do you see a lot of orders shifting in the order or some?
I've actually just today inserted into the paper a new table. Didn't even build it yet. Maybe I'll just tell you in words, I think. So basically the probability of remaining the winner in two consecutive periods is 84%. No, the loser is 84% and remaining the winner is 72%. So there's actually quite a bit of shuffling around in the positions. However, I mean, there are some firms that remain fairly stable. So Frederik and I have another paper that's looking at the dynamics, which is much more into this. But if you look at the within variation inside firms, there's quite a lot of within variation in prices as well. Obviously, there are some firms like the original manufacturer, they tend to not change their price almost at all. So they are very inactive. But I think that the discontinuity at the bottom is what makes the price equilibrium particularly volatile. The exception being in the most competitive market. So with the 8 firms, there you sometimes see that there's just one firm that's setting a price where the others aren't really engaging.
So following up on this, is this almost like a worrying part of the policy then? Like it's almost like the government policy itself is creating an incentive to mix.
Yeah. So I mean, in the other paper, we're looking at so some of the markets have price cycles, and the hikes that begin these price cycles can be on the order of 200%. So you have people on television last year saying, man, these drugs are super important to me and I need them every week, and suddenly this cost 4 times as much and I couldn't afford it. Never mind that they're insured, but this is really disconcerting to the consumers, even though in international comparisons it looks like we're coming out on the low side on averages, so that it seems like the mechanism has kind of a trade-off between the variability of prices and the level.
Makes sense. I have a clarification question. I think you referred to it as free search or the counterfactual a few slides back.
Yeah.
That's not randomizing the order. That's setting search cost to 0, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how does this compare to just randomizing the order?
It depends on whether you randomize the order simultaneously, or you randomize them for each doctor separately. I think if you randomize them on a period level, then maybe you'll get something that looks a little bit like the baseline. But if you randomize them across every single doctor, I think you get the same as removing search frictions. Basically, you're directing them in random directions. Welfare might be a little bit lower because they aren't able to select a better match. Although, I mean, my feeling is that there's very limited match quality here, apart from a few notable exceptions, and those are specific markets where a delivery agent can cause allergic reactions or whatever.
And I'm actually realizing, since it's essentially a covered market, the zeroing out of search costs or just equalizing of search costs is pretty much the same here, right? Because this is
We're assuming away extensive margin responses. Yeah. No, that's true. Yeah.
Any other questions? Okay, I'm gonna stop the recording here.